Pastor Ed here with Daily Devotions for Friday, May the 12th, 2023. We're nearing the end of our week of looking at the reading from last Sunday, Romans 1 to 17. We want to focus these last 2 days, today and tomorrow, on verse 16. Of course, kind of to recap, Paul has introduced himself to this congregation in Rome that he did not have a part of establishing or helping to get going. So he kind of has to list his qualifications and his reason for writing. And he talks about his eagerness to proclaim the gospel with them. And then in verse 16, he says, "For I am not ashamed of the gospel. It is the power of God for salvation to everyone who has faith, to the Jew first and also to the Greek." Jan Hus came from Prague, and he lived about 100 years before Martin Luther. And unlike Luther, times were a little bit different then. Luther benefited from that passage of 100 years and how things were changing within Europe and even within the church, because Huss basically did the kind of same things that Luther did. And he ended up being burned at the stake at the age of 46. His only crime was an uncompromising preaching of the gospel and calling for church reform in pre-Reformation Europe. 100 years later, Luther was able to get away with it, in a sense, in a way that Huss wasn't. He would preach, Huss that is, at the Bethlehem Chapel that was next to the University of Prague. Czech nobles had built the chapel, supported the preaching ministry of Huss, who was a highly trained scholar and preacher. But the corrupt and politically motivated archbishop saw him as a threat. And the truth and power struggle between the two led to riots. And in fact, in a move to regain control of the city, the cardinal excommunicated Huss from the Roman Catholic Church, ordered the city to be deprived, in a sense, of a church-related ministry, which was a matter of extreme consequence in the Middle Ages. Meanwhile, the same issue that Luther spoke out against, the selling of indulgences, continued to go on. They continued to be sold, in this case, to fund a war against Naples. But Huss was now a wanted man, had to be sequestered away in the castles of noblemen, much like Luther was in Wartburg Castle 100 years later. But in 1414, he was manipulated to attend a church council to defend his beliefs. Sound familiar? False accusations led to criminal conviction. But Huss, unlike Luther, who was actually spirited away by his allies, the elector, Huss was actually imprisoned and tortured. And before being burned at the stake, his dying words were, "In the truth of the gospel, of which I have written, taught, and preached, I will die today with gladness." Obviously, change was the push for change came along long before Luther, and Huss had the misfortune of being maybe the first one to speak so vocally and publicly about that. Luther faced his own threats of was excommunicated and very could easily have lost his life if, again, Prince Frederick, the elector, hadn't spirited him away to Wartburg Castle to save him from the bounty that was on his life. But getting back to Paul's point, the power of the gospel, not being ashamed of the gospel, which is the power of salvation. We all know the story of 9/11. One of the many stories involves a woman by the name of Jeannie Braca, whose husband Al worked as a corporate bond trader for Cantor Fitzgerald on the 105th floor of Tower 1. He had survived the World Trade Center bombing in 1993. It even helped a woman with asthma escape from the building at that time. And so Jeannie knew that her husband would be doing the same thing. I knew he'd try to help and minister to people. but alas, he was one of those who lost their life. It took a week, but a week later, his body was found in the rubble, and his wife and son were devastated. But then reports began to trickle in from friends and acquaintances. People had made a last call or sent a final email there on the 105th floor, and many talked about this man who was leading them all in prayer. Some of them even referred to him, to refer to Al by name. And they learned in bits and pieces how he had indeed been ministering to people. And that was no surprise to his wife, because even though there was much about the job that he didn't like, he didn't enjoy the environment, because there was a world so out of touch with his values, he wouldn't quit because he was convinced that God wanted him to stay there, to be a light in the darkness. He was not ashamed of Christ and Christ's words. He shared his faith with his co-workers, many of whom sarcastically nicknamed him the Rev. And on that fateful day of September the 11th, in the midst of all the chaos, his co-workers looked to him and he delivered. He also tried to get a phone call through to his own family, asked an MCI operator to share a message, tell them that I love him, he said. And it took that operator more than a month to reach his wife and son, but the message that finally came brought them much needed comfort. As the son said, the last thing my dad did involved the two things most important to him, God and his family. He loved to lead people to Christ, and that takes away a lot of the hurt and the pain. Jan Hus, and this Al Braca, two people among many and many and many who were not ashamed of the gospel and ashamed of the power of the gospel for salvation. Well, we'll be together one more time this week to wrap things up. Until then, take care. Bye.